My wife told me she needed to visit her college roommate Monica in Memphis for a family crisis, but something felt off about the whole situation. I'm Trevor, a quality control manager at a textile manufacturing plant here in suburban Nashville, and after 8 years of marriage to Jasmine, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people and situations the same way I evaluated production processes and quality standards at work. Jasmine worked as an account manager at a real estate development firm downtown, handling client relationships and property consultations with what I'd always admired as professional competence and social grace, maintaining detailed client files and building long-term business relationships that required both attention to detail and genuine interpersonal skills. Our marriage had been solid and predictable, built on shared goals about homeownership, career advancement, and eventually starting a family once we'd achieved better financial stability and saved enough for a down payment on a house in one of Nashville's growing suburban communities. When she mentioned the sudden trip to Memphis on Tuesday morning over coffee in our small kitchen, I naturally offered to drive with her or at least help coordinate time off from work so I could provide moral support during what sounded like a difficult family situation, but she quickly shut down my suggestions with an edge in her voice I hadn't heard before. She insisted this was personal women's business that Monica specifically needed to handle privately, involving family dynamics and emotional conversations that would make my presence awkward and uncomfortable for everyone involved, especially since I didn't know the family members well enough to understand all the complicated relationships and history. I found it strange since Monica had always been welcoming and inclusive during our previous visits to Memphis, treating me like family during holiday gatherings and weekend trips, and I'd never known her to be dealing with any serious family issues that would require this level of secrecy and urgency. Monica worked as a freelance graphic designer and had always been open about her life, sharing stories about her work projects, dating experiences, and family relationships during our conversations, so this sudden crisis seemed completely out of character for both her personality and her typical communication style. Despite my growing unease, I decided to respect Jasmine's boundaries and support her however she needed, understanding that some situations require space and that my wife might have insights into Monica's needs that I wasn't privy to as someone outside their close college friendship. She packed a small overnight bag Wednesday evening, carefully selecting clothes that seemed more suited for leisure activities than comforting a friend in crisis, including designer jeans and several nice blouses that I remembered her buying specifically for special occasions rather than casual visits. The goodbye kiss Thursday morning felt different too, carrying what seemed like nervous energy rather than the usual warmth and familiarity, and she avoided eye contact while promising to call once she arrived and update me on how long she might need to stay depending on how the family situation developed. The first concerning sign hit me Thursday afternoon when my calls went straight to voicemail and my text messages remained unread for hours, which was completely unlike Jasmine's normal communication patterns even during her busiest workdays when she was juggling multiple client meetings and property showings. She typically responded to my messages within an hour or two at most, and we had an established routine of checking in with each other throughout the day, sharing updates about work projects, evening plans, and general life coordination that kept us connected despite our different schedules. By Thursday evening, I was genuinely worried that something had happened during her drive to Memphis or that the family crisis had escalated beyond what she'd initially described to me, perhaps requiring her full attention and preventing her from maintaining contact with anyone outside the immediate situation. Friday brought more complete silence, with my calls continuing to go directly to voicemail and my increasingly concerned text messages showing as delivered but never read, creating a growing sense of anxiety that something was seriously wrong either with Jasmine personally or with whatever situation she was supposedly helping Monica navigate. When Saturday arrived with still no word from my wife, I made the difficult decision to contact Monica directly despite knowing Jasmine might be upset about me interfering in what she'd specifically called a private situation, but my concern for her safety and well-being outweighed my respect for her request for privacy. Monica's immediate confusion was both unsettling and illuminating when I explained why I was calling, asking if Jasmine was okay and whether the family crisis was being resolved, and she quickly informed me that she'd been traveling through Europe for the past 2 weeks on a photography assignment for a marketing firm and hadn't spoken to Jasmine in several months since their last brief catch-up call sometime around the holidays. The realization that my wife had deliberately and elaborately lied about her whereabouts sent a cold wave of understanding through me, and I knew I needed concrete evidence and professional guidance before making any accusations or decisions about what this deception might mean for our marriage and future together. I spent Saturday night researching private investigation services in Nashville, reading reviews and comparing credentials, finally settling on Frank Morrison, a former police detective who specialized in marital investigations and came highly recommended through online testimonials and professional references from local attorneys who'd worked with him on divorce cases. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work and met Frank at his modest office in a downtown Nashville business complex, providing him with all of Jasmine's personal information, recent photographs, credit card numbers, vehicle details, work schedule, and everything I could remember about her behavioral changes over the past month that might help him track her actual location and activities. Frank's methodical questions about our marriage, Jasmine's routines, her social circles, and recent changes in her behavior gave me confidence that whatever I was about to discover would be thoroughly documented and legally obtained, even though part of me still desperately hoped there might be an innocent explanation for everything that had happened and that my suspicions would prove unfounded. Jasmine returned Saturday evening around 9 o'clock carrying multiple designer shopping bags from expensive boutiques I knew she couldn't afford on her salary, her demeanor immediately defensive and irritated when I asked simple questions about her trip and whether Monica's family situation had been resolved satisfactorily. She dismissed my concerns with a sharp edge in her voice that I'd never heard before, telling me flatly that it was her life and her rules, and that I shouldn't ask her anything about where she'd been or what she'd been doing because she didn't owe me detailed explanations about every aspect of her personal relationships and activities. The shopping bags contained designer clothes with tags still attached, expensive jewelry, and luxury items that would have cost thousands of dollars, far beyond what she could have afforded even with our joint credit cards. And when I asked about the purchases, she claimed Monica had insisted on buying her things as a thank you for helping during the crisis. I maintained my composure despite the obvious lies, calmly walking to the kitchen counter where I'd placed a thick manila envelope that Frank had delivered earlier that afternoon, containing his comprehensive surveillance report that documented exactly where my wife had spent the past 3 days and with whom she'd spent them. The envelope held dozens of high-resolution photographs showing Jasmine with a tall, well-dressed man named Derek Thompson at an upscale ski lodge in Gatlinburg, complete with timestamps, credit card receipts showing charges to our joint account, and hotel registration records that Frank had obtained through his professional contacts and investigative resources. The photographic evidence was devastating and undeniable, showing intimate moments by the fireplace in the lodge's main room, expensive dinners at restaurants where they sat close together holding hands across candlelit tables, and Derek's luxury Mercedes parked outside their shared room for 3 consecutive nights while they enjoyed what was clearly a romantic getaway funded partially by my earnings and careful savings. Frank's report included Derek's full background information revealing he was a successful architect who owned his own firm specializing in commercial development projects, recently divorced after a contentious settlement, and had been featured in regional design magazines for his innovative residential and office building designs, making him exactly the type of successful, affluent man that Jasmine had always claimed to find attractive and impressive. When I placed the envelope on our coffee table and told Jasmine she might want to look through the contents before we continued our conversation about her trip, her face went through a series of expressions from confusion to recognition to panic as she realized the implications of what I'd discovered and documented. She attempted to claim the photographs were fabricated or somehow digitally doctored, that Frank must have confused her with someone else who looked similar, or that there was an innocent explanation for what appeared to be romantic and intimate behavior with a man I'd never heard her mention before throughout our 8 years of marriage. I calmly produced printed cell phone records that I'd obtained through our shared family plan, showing dozens of deleted text messages between Jasmine and Derek over the past 6 weeks, with message previews revealing they'd been planning this getaway for almost a month and discussing in detail how to keep it secret from me while they explored their growing attraction and emotional connection. The evidence included detailed conversations about meeting at the lodge, coordinating their work schedules to create the cover story, discussing what clothes to pack for different activities, and even Derek offering to pay for various expenses while expressing his excitement about spending uninterrupted romantic time with her away from the complications and restrictions of her married life. Jasmine's denials became increasingly desperate and illogical as I presented each piece of evidence methodically and calmly, the same way I would document a quality control failure at work, showing her timestamps that proved she'd been actively lying about her whereabouts while engaging in elaborate planning for what was obviously an affair that had been developing for weeks before this particular trip. The hotel receipts showed specific charges for champagne service, couples massage appointments, room service dinners, and luxury amenities that clearly indicated a romantic getaway rather than any kind of emergency family assistance, and Derek's credit card had paid for most of the major expenses while our joint account covered her personal purchases and incidental costs throughout their time together. I presented Jasmine with pre-filed divorce papers along with a detailed property division proposal that I'd prepared during my Friday consultation with attorney Patricia Walsh, who specialized in infidelity cases and had walked me through the legal implications of adultery in Tennessee divorce proceedings. Patricia had been thorough and professional, explaining how documented evidence of marital misconduct could affect asset division, spousal support considerations, and the overall timeline of divorce proceedings, particularly when one spouse had used marital funds to finance an extramarital affair. The divorce papers were comprehensive and legally sound, outlining the division of our joint assets including our savings account, retirement contributions, vehicle ownership, and the termination of all shared financial obligations and credit accounts that we'd established during our 8 years of marriage. Jasmine cycled through the predictable stages of denial, anger, and desperate manipulation tactics when she realized I was completely serious about ending our marriage, initially claiming the papers were just a scare tactic designed to force her into admitting something she hadn't actually done. She transitioned to anger when she understood that I'd already taken concrete legal steps, accusing me of being vindictive and cruel, suggesting that hiring a private investigator and consulting with a divorce attorney proved I'd never really loved her or trusted her throughout our entire relationship. When anger failed to generate the response she wanted, she shifted to manipulation and negotiation tactics, claiming we could work through this problem with couples therapy and professional counseling, insisting that her affair with Derek had been a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a deliberate betrayal of our marriage vows and commitment. She argued that Derek had pursued her aggressively during a vulnerable period when she was questioning our relationship, and that she'd been confused and flattered by his attention rather than genuinely interested in leaving our marriage for another man. I listened to her explanations and promises with the same analytical detachment I used to evaluate production problems at work, recognizing the patterns of blame shifting and responsibility avoidance that characterized her attempts to minimize the significance of her choices and actions. Patricia had warned me about these common tactics and advised me to remain focused on the documented facts rather than getting drawn into emotional arguments about motivations, intentions, or potential for reconciliation. I gave Jasmine exactly 72 hours to vacate our rented townhouse and remove her personal belongings, making it clear that this timeline was non-negotiable and that any attempt to delay or contest the divorce would result in additional consequences for her professional and social reputation. I explained calmly that I had copies of Frank's complete surveillance report ready to distribute to her real estate firm's management, her family members, and our shared social circle if she attempted to drag out the divorce proceedings or make false accusations about my character or behavior during our marriage. Patricia had advised me that Tennessee's fault-based divorce laws meant that documented adultery could significantly impact the proceedings, and that Jasmine's use of marital funds for her affair constituted financial misconduct that would be considered during asset division. When Jasmine tested my resolve by staying an extra day beyond the 72-hour deadline, apparently believing I was bluffing about the consequences, I followed through on my warning by emailing selected photographs and documentation to her supervisor at the real estate firm and her parents, forcing her to pack her belongings immediately and leave that same evening. The emails were professional and factual, simply stating that I thought they should be aware of recent developments that might affect Jasmine's professional standing and personal situation, along with copies of the surveillance photos that clearly showed her engaging in an extramarital affair while using false pretenses to cover her activities. Her supervisor responded within hours, requesting a meeting to discuss potential ethical violations and client relationship concerns, while her parents called her immediately demanding explanations for what they perceived as shocking and completely out-of-character behavior. I felt no satisfaction in taking these steps, but I understood that Jasmine needed to face real consequences for her choices, and that my willingness to follow through on stated boundaries would determine whether the divorce proceedings moved forward efficiently or devolved into a prolonged and contentious battle. Derek called my personal cell phone on Tuesday evening demanding that I stop harassing Jasmine and claiming their relationship had begun only after her marriage was already emotionally over, revealing himself to be a divorced architect who owned a successful commercial design firm and had apparently believed Jasmine's elaborate lies about our marriage being a loveless arrangement that she was planning to end regardless of his involvement. His voice carried the confident authority of someone accustomed to getting his way in business negotiations, but I could detect underlying uncertainty as he tried to justify his role in pursuing a married woman while simultaneously demanding that I cease what he called my vindictive campaign against someone he claimed to care about deeply. I explained calmly that my investigation had been focused solely on documenting my wife's deception and gathering evidence for divorce proceedings, and that any consequences Derek was experiencing resulted from his own choices rather than any vindictive actions on my part. My follow-up investigation into Derek's background uncovered that he owned Thompson Design Associates, a firm specializing in luxury residential and commercial projects that had been featured prominently in Nashville Business Journal and regional architecture magazines, making him an attractive target for someone like Jasmine who had always been impressed by financial success and professional recognition. Derek's recent divorce settlement had been contentious and expensive according to public records, but he'd retained ownership of his firm and several investment properties, giving him the financial resources and lifestyle that Jasmine found appealing compared to my steady but modest middle-class income. The investigation also revealed Derek's pattern of pursuing married women, information I obtained when his ex-wife Jennifer contacted me after learning about the situation through mutual professional connections in Nashville's business community. Jennifer provided detailed documentation of Derek's previous affairs during their marriage, including evidence that he specifically targeted women in unhappy marriages by positioning himself as their emotional savior and financial upgrade, using his professional success and divorced status to appear more stable and available than he actually was in practice. She offered to testify in divorce proceedings about Derek's manipulative patterns and his history of making false promises to women while maintaining multiple relationships simultaneously, information that could prove valuable if Jasmine attempted to claim that Derek represented a genuine long-term alternative to our marriage. Jennifer's evidence included email exchanges, witness statements from other affair partners, and documentation of Derek's tendency to lose interest in women once they became emotionally dependent on him or their existing relationships ended, suggesting that Jasmine's situation was following a predictable pattern rather than representing genuine love or commitment. Meanwhile, Jasmine's parents Arnold and Linda initially defended their daughter when I first contacted them with photographic evidence, suggesting that there must be some misunderstanding or that their marriage problems had driven her to seek comfort elsewhere, but their attitude changed dramatically when they reviewed Frank's complete investigative dossier and the financial records showing how their joint credit cards had been used. The documentation included itemized receipts for luxury purchases, hotel stays, restaurant bills, and travel expenses that totaled several $1,000s of marital funds used specifically to finance Jasmine's affair, creating what Patricia explained was a clear case of financial misconduct that could affect asset division in the divorce proceedings. Arnold, a retired electrician who had worked hard his entire life to provide for his family, was particularly outraged when he realized that his daughter had used money I'd earned through careful work and saving to fund what he called her selfish betrayal of marriage vows and family values. Linda, who had always spoken proudly of Jasmine's professional success and stable marriage, struggled to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the evidence of calculated deception and infidelity that Frank's investigation had documented so thoroughly. The confrontation escalated when Derek's ex-wife Jennifer attended a meeting with Derek, Jasmine, and both sets of parents, presenting her evidence about Derek's history and warning everyone involved that his pattern was to pursue married women until they left their husbands, then lose interest once the excitement of the affair ended and reality set in. Jennifer's testimony was devastating to Derek's credibility, revealing that he had used identical tactics and made similar promises to at least 3 other women over the past 5 years, always presenting himself as their solution to marital unhappiness while having no genuine intention of building lasting relationships with any of them. She provided documentation showing Derek's previous promises to leave his wife for other women, his pattern of financial manipulation, and his tendency to move on to new targets once his current affair partners became too emotionally demanding or their situations became complicated by divorce proceedings and family involvement. Jasmine's real estate firm terminated her employment within a week after clients began requesting different agents upon learning about her affair through social media posts from mutual acquaintances and professional networking connections throughout Nashville's tight-knit business community. Her supervisor had conducted a thorough internal investigation after receiving my documentation, discovering that Derek had actually been a potential client she'd met during a commercial property consultation 6 months earlier, creating serious ethical violations and potential legal liability for the company if clients learned that personal relationships were being developed during professional business meetings. The firm's partners were particularly concerned about their reputation in Nashville's competitive real estate market, where professional integrity and trustworthiness were essential for maintaining long-term client relationships and referral networks that generated most of their high-value transactions. Jasmine had been working with Derek on a potential office space lease for his architecture firm when their personal relationship began, meaning she had violated company policies about maintaining professional boundaries with clients while potentially compromising her ability to represent the firm's interests objectively during negotiations. The investigation revealed that Derek's architecture firm had been considering a significant lease commitment that would have generated substantial commission income for Jasmine's agency, but the personal relationship had created conflicts of interest that made it impossible for her to continue representing the firm's interests in any capacity. When news of the affair spread through Nashville's interconnected professional networks, several other clients requested reassignment to different agents, expressing concerns about Jasmine's judgment and reliability after learning about her willingness to deceive her husband while maintaining professional relationships that had clearly been compromised by personal involvement. The firm's management determined that keeping Jasmine employed would create ongoing liability issues and damage their reputation among clients who valued traditional family values and professional integrity, leading to her immediate termination with cause and the forfeiture of pending commission payments from transactions she'd been working on for months. My methodical documentation strategy proved invaluable when Derek's architecture firm dropped him as a partner after his affair became public knowledge through professional gossip networks and client concerns about his character and business judgment, destroying both their careers simultaneously in a way that demonstrated the real-world consequences of their choices. Derek's partners had invested years building their firm's reputation for reliability and professional excellence, and they couldn't risk having their brand associated with someone whose personal conduct had become a source of industry speculation and client discomfort. The firm had been competing for several major commercial development contracts that required complete trust from conservative clients who valued stability and traditional values, making Derek's scandal a significant liability that threatened their ability to win new business and maintain existing relationships. Derek's buyout from the partnership was negotiated at below market value due to the ethical concerns and reputation damage his conduct had created, effectively destroying years of professional investment and leaving him with limited options for continuing his career in Nashville's small architectural community. Meanwhile, Jasmine's attempts to blame me for ruining her life through social media posts backfired spectacularly when Frank's photographs and evidence were shared widely through our mutual social networks, turning public opinion against her completely as people realized the extent of her deception and manipulation. Her Facebook posts claiming she was the victim of a controlling and vindictive husband were quickly contradicted by friends and family members who shared details about the evidence I'd provided, including the hotel receipts, surveillance photos, and documented lies about her whereabouts during the affair. The social media campaign she'd hoped would generate sympathy and support instead revealed her character to people who had previously respected her professional achievements and believed her to be happily married, creating a cascade of lost friendships and social connections that extended far beyond the immediate consequences of her employment termination. Former colleagues, neighbors, and family friends began distancing themselves from Jasmine as the full scope of her deception became apparent, particularly when they learned that she'd used marital funds to finance her affair while lying to everyone about her relationship status and future plans. The public humiliation was complete when several mutual acquaintances posted their own experiences with Jasmine's lies and manipulation, revealing a pattern of deception that extended beyond her affair to include various social and professional situations where she'd been dishonest about her circumstances or intentions. Derek's reputation in Nashville's professional community was similarly destroyed when Jennifer's evidence about his pattern of pursuing married women was shared through architectural industry networks, effectively blacklisting him from future partnerships and major project opportunities in the region. 6 months after our separation was finalized, Jasmine appeared at my new apartment complex looking disheveled and desperate, claiming she'd been living with various friends while working retail jobs to survive after losing her professional career and most of her social connections. She had lost significant weight and her appearance reflected the stress of her dramatically changed circumstances, with her previously polished professional image replaced by cheap clothing and an overall presentation that suggested someone struggling financially and emotionally. I observed her through my apartment's security camera system before deciding whether to answer the door, noting that she appeared to have been crying and was carrying what looked like a folder of documents that she probably hoped would support whatever case she was planning to make. When I finally opened the door, she immediately launched into a desperate plea for forgiveness, claiming she'd made the biggest mistake of her life and promising to do anything necessary to rebuild our relationship and restore the trust she'd destroyed through her affair and deception. She begged for a trial reconciliation period where she could prove her commitment to our marriage, promising to attend individual and couples therapy, submit to complete transparency regarding her activities and relationships, and work toward rebuilding the foundation of trust that her affair had completely undermined. Her desperation was genuine but manipulative, combining real tears with calculated appeals to our shared history and the life we'd built together before Derek's involvement destroyed everything we'd worked to achieve over 8 years of marriage. I remained completely unmoved by her emotional manipulation tactics, recognizing them as the same strategies she'd used during our final confrontation about the affair, and I made it clear that my decision to end our marriage was final and non-negotiable regardless of her current circumstances. Derek had relocated to Colorado after losing his business partnerships and professional reputation in Nashville, leaving Jasmine completely isolated from the social and professional networks she'd relied on throughout our marriage, with no support system beyond her increasingly frustrated parents who were dealing with their own embarrassment about their daughter's public scandal. Her attempts to find employment in Nashville's real estate industry had been unsuccessful due to her reputation for ethical violations and the tight-knit nature of the professional community, forcing her to accept minimum-wage retail positions that barely covered her basic living expenses. She explained that several friends had initially offered temporary housing and emotional support, but these arrangements had become strained as her financial situation failed to improve and her emotional neediness became exhausting for people who had their own lives and responsibilities to manage. When Jasmine's emotional manipulation failed to generate the response she wanted, she shifted tactics and threatened legal action, claiming my investigation had violated her privacy rights and that Frank's surveillance methods had been potentially illegal, but attorney Patricia Walsh easily dismantled these claims with documentation proving everything had been obtained legally through legitimate investigative techniques. Patricia had anticipated these potential challenges and had ensured that Frank's investigation methods were completely above board, with all surveillance conducted in public spaces, financial records obtained through legitimate channels, and photographic evidence gathered without any invasion of legally protected privacy. Jasmine's threats were particularly ironic given that she was the one who had engaged in deceptive behavior, used marital funds for personal affairs, and violated the trust that formed the foundation of our marriage relationship, making her claims about privacy violations seem desperate and unrealistic. Her consultation with a different attorney had apparently confirmed what Patricia had told me about Tennessee's fault-based divorce laws and the strong legal position that documented adultery and financial misconduct had given me throughout the proceedings. The attorney had probably explained that pursuing litigation against me would be expensive, unlikely to succeed, and potentially damaging to any remaining reputation she hoped to preserve in Nashville's legal and business communities. Jasmine's final desperate attempt involved claiming that Derek had manipulated and deceived her just as much as he'd deceived me, suggesting that we were both victims of his calculated manipulation and that this shared experience could form the basis for rebuilding our relationship, but I recognized this as another manipulation tactic designed to absolve her of responsibility for her choices and actions. 2 years later, I had been promoted to Regional Operations Director at the textile manufacturing plant and purchased a 3-bedroom house in Franklin, successfully rebuilding my life while maintaining minimal contact with Jasmine through legal channels only for the final divorce paperwork and asset transfers that Patricia continued to handle professionally. My promotion came with a substantial salary increase and additional responsibilities overseeing quality control operations across multiple facilities throughout Tennessee and Kentucky, providing me with both financial security and professional satisfaction that exceeded what I'd achieved during my marriage. The house in Franklin represented everything Jasmine and I had talked about achieving together, but I'd accomplished it independently with a clear sense of personal pride and without the emotional complications that had characterized our joint financial planning discussions. I had established new routines, developed friendships with colleagues and neighbors, and created a life that felt stable and purposeful in ways that my marriage had never quite achieved despite our shared goals and apparent compatibility. Jasmine contacted me one final time through a desperate phone call revealing she was facing bankruptcy after Derek had sued her for defamation when she blamed him publicly for destroying her career through social media posts and interviews with local media outlets that had covered their scandal. Derek's lawsuit claimed that Jasmine's public statements had damaged his attempts to rebuild his professional reputation in Colorado, where he'd been working to establish new business relationships and distance himself from the Nashville scandal that had destroyed his previous career trajectory. The legal fees for defending against Derek's lawsuit, combined with her ongoing inability to find stable employment and her accumulated debts from 2 years of financial struggles, had created a situation where bankruptcy seemed like her only option for achieving any kind of fresh start. She desperately needed financial help with legal fees and living expenses, claiming that Derek's lawsuit was vindictive and unfair given his own role in creating the situation that had destroyed both of their lives and reputations. I politely declined to provide any assistance, explaining that her legal and financial problems were consequences of choices she'd made independently and that my obligation to help her had ended when she decided to pursue an affair rather than address whatever problems she'd perceived in our marriage. Through mutual connections and social media updates, I learned that Derek had actually succeeded in rebuilding his career in Colorado by joining an established architectural firm as a senior associate, apparently having learned to keep his personal life separate from his professional activities. Meanwhile, Jasmine had been forced to move back in with her parents Arnold and Linda after losing her apartment when she could no longer afford rent on her retail income, creating tension in their household as they dealt with their adult daughter's continued dependence and the ongoing embarrassment her scandal had caused in their social circles. Her parents' retirement had been impacted by the financial assistance they'd provided during her crisis, and their relationship with Jasmine remained strained as she struggled to take responsibility for the consequences of her actions. The final encounter occurred when I ran into Jasmine at a grocery store where she was working as a cashier, both of us immediately recognizing how completely our positions had reversed since the day she'd told me her life belonged to her and she didn't owe me explanations. She was wearing the store's uniform and appeared tired but had maintained some dignity in her presentation, suggesting she was slowly adapting to her changed circumstances rather than continuing to blame others for her situation. I offered polite but distant pleasantries, asking how she was doing in the neutral tone one might use with any acquaintance, while maintaining the boundaries I'd established during our divorce proceedings. She responded with similar politeness, acknowledging my success without resentment and expressing what seemed like genuine hope that I was happy with the life I'd built, though I detected underlying sadness about the opportunities she'd lost through her own choices. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it provided closure for both of us as we acknowledged the complete reversal of our circumstances and the finality of the path her decisions had created. I left the store feeling satisfied with the justice of the situation while harboring no ill will towards someone who had ultimately provided me with the opportunity to build a better life than we'd ever achieved together.